All right, we're at part 3 of our introduction to physiology, and now we'll be discussing animal physiology. Animals generally demonstrate a much greater degree of cellular differentiation than plants or protists or fungi. Because of this, animals demonstrate the greatest diversity of tissue level, organ level, and systems level of organization. Let's look at the cells and tissues of cells and tissues of animals. We'll examine epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscular tissue, and nervous tissue. Epithelial tissue is basically the tissue that lines the body. It can have a wide variety of structures and functions, and their functions include absorption, protection, sensation, cleaning, secretion, and excretion, among other things as well. Epithelial tissue is separated from other tissues by a barrier called the basement membrane, or the basal tissue. So here, the little orange cells comprise our epithelial tissue, and below them, we might have another tissue, but something called the basement membrane, or the basal lamina, or the basal tissue, will separate that epithelial tissue from other tissues in the body. Next, we have connective tissue, and you're probably familiar with this. Connective tissue is a fibrous tissue that provides structure and support in the body. It includes bone, cartilage, blood, adipose tissue, which is also known as fat, ligaments, and tendons. The red structure right here is muscle, and muscle is connected to bone so that it can move the bone by connective tissue. So connective tissue is kind of the bridge between muscle and bone. So that's just one example of connective tissue. Then we have muscular tissue. Muscular tissue is responsible for moving, or the locomotion, both internally, so inside the body, and externally, so moving your body parts around. We have 3 major types of muscular tissue. We have skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. Our skeletal muscle tissue is also known as striated muscle tissue. It includes all the voluntary movement, so all the muscles that you use to move your hands, your eyes, and whatnot. Our cardiac muscle are special muscles that comprise the heart. So remember, cardiac just has to do with the heart. Smooth muscle lines the organs in the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract, and is responsible for peristalsis. So peristalsis is basically when the muscles in your GI tract contract to move food down down through your esophagus to your stomach, and then through your intestines. Nervous tissue is responsible for the coordination and control of the body. So it tells your body what to do and make sure everything is running right. It's comprised of neurons and glial cells. So you're most likely familiar with neurons. Glial cells are also part of nervous tissue. Basically, they are cells that support neurons. Then we have our organs and organ systems. Animal tissues are arranged into organs, and then we group those organs into organ systems that cooperate to allow for the animal to obtain or to accomplish life functions. Now remember our word homeostasis. That's the internal steady state or stable state that's needed to remain alive. Now we don't mean that everything throughout your body is exactly the same. We obviously have different concentrations of different things throughout our body, and different functions are happening in different spots. But if our body doesn't have an overall stable state, meaning our temperature is not constantly changing and our mass is not constantly changing, if we're not in homeostasis, then the organism will die. The nervous system is what monitors the conditions outside the body and inside the body, and it affects responses that maintain the homeostasis through the function of the organ systems. Now here's some examples of organ systems. We'll be studying these in our next couple of videos. We have our digestive system, circulatory, respiratory, immune and lymphatic, excretory, endocrine, reproductive, nervous, integumentary, skeletal, and our muscular system. So we've got a lot of them. And here's some things that it's always important to remember that all living things do. The physiological processes that are at work in any organism are always constrained by the environment and adapted by evolution. So what an organism is doing is always as a response of its environment and its physiological conditions. So what body parts it has are a result of evolution over time. Our first example of this is material exchange with the environment. Unicellular and multicellular organisms are able to exchange materials directly with their environment. They move things into their cells and out of their cells. Plants and animals have evolved many adaptations to accomplish these exchanges internally, And they usually do this by maximizing the surface area. Just like if you folded a paper towel, you would be able to clean up a mess faster, or you'd be able to clean up a spill faster. Lots of plants and animals have tissues that are folded, and those help to accomplish or to effect absorption in the body or exchange of materials. So one example are the villi that line the small intestine. So the villi are little folds, little finger-like projections in the small intestine, and the villi even have more folds on their surface called microvilli. So each of these folds or finger-like projections has even more finger-like projections on its surface. So it's great for absorbing nutrients. Next we have our alveoli in the lungs. There are these little sacs that line the lungs and help to exchange gas or exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen and oxygen for carbon dioxide. And also, if we look at the kidney, we'll see that there's little bunches of blood vessels all throughout the kidney to effect a greater rate of exchange of materials so that the kidney can better filter the blood. All right, our next example is energy considerations. Remember that the energetic conditions are the considerations of an organism's environment. So whatever energy is available in the environment is going to have consequences for the physiology and behavior of organisms. For example, there are some hares that when they're really, really hot, they can lift up their large ears, and their large ears have a lot of blood vessels in them. And they can use that to release extra body heat. Also, think about humans. What do we do when it's cold? We wear jackets, okay? And so the energy in our environment somehow affects our behavior and sometimes affects our physiology as well. And our last example is convergence. So similar environmental constraints will lead to similar adaptive solutions. So for example, a seal, a penguin, and a tuna are not closely related, but their body structures are very similar in that they're streamlined and they have fins and flippers in order to swim better in the ocean.